Welcome to the Bladtcast. Very excited for this conversation. Making his triumphant return, triumphant for me, not necessarily so much for him, to the Bladtcast, musician Brian Wheat, best known for Tesla, their latest album from earlier this year, Five-Man London Jam. And he's also now an author with the book Son of a Milkman, which will be released December 15th. So by the time you're seeing and or hearing this, you'll find that the book is already available. First of all, Brian, thank you so much. It's great to get a chance to talk to you again.
Oh, thanks for having me back, man. It's always nice to talk to you.
Yeah, and for people watching the video, and you know, you'll be able to see a thumbnail even if you're just listening to the audio version. They're going to see you and I were talking right before we started. You have really turned into the skid of the COVID beard, and it seems very likely you might be able to find some part-time seasonal work this time of year if you were to be so inclined.
Well, they don't know when we'll play concerts again.
Yeah.
So, no one could give us a straight answer. So I'm protesting. I'm not dyeing my hair. I'm not cutting it. I'm not trimming my beard. And I want to see how long it can go. I mean, maybe it'll be down to my belly by the time we're able to actually play a show. So
well, at that point, Tesla would have to tour with ZZ Top just so that you could fit in,
Yeah, well, I'll shave it as soon as I know for sure I'm playing a concert again.
Yeah,
I'll shave and get back to, looking like normal Brian bass player. But right now, This is Brian. I'm in quarantine, COVID. Who the hell knows what's going on in this wacky world?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing in the these months that I've talked to a lot of musicians. Early on it was like, yeah, we're hopeful by the fall. This is what they were saying, like in the spring. That maybe by the end of summer, and it's kind of gotten to a point where you'll get a couple guys who've played a gig, like a big like outdoor in Colorado or something. Every once in a while, there's like one-offs that you find people do, but for the most part, it's like, yeah, I just hope I get to play ever again. I mean, it's just like, because you can't put a time frame on it. And I know I spoke with your bandmate Frank Hannon over the summer, and he, of course, as I'm sure you all were disappointed. As me as a fan, I would have loved to have seen you guys out on tour with Lita Ford and Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
You guys were going to play the Hollywood Bowl. I was very excited for that, and I can imagine that getting to do those shows would have been great, but it's not just you guys that sort of thing happened to. It basically, your whole year got upended, probably.
Well, the whole industry.
Yeah.
The whole industry's down, and no one's able to do anything. And, for that matter, even I think the film industry. So, who knows, man? I hope they get it together soon.
Yeah.
Figure out what's going on. I mean, you don't hear about it for months on end, and then all of a sudden it's back in full force. And I don't know what to believe, to be quite honest with you. I believe that there is COVID and it's out there, and, locking down the country to this extent, I don't know. I mean, who knows? I know it's, definitely affecting millions and millions of people. So let's just hope that the karma gods are good and we can all get back to something that resembles some sense of normalcy again.
Yeah, no, I think that's really what is great. And, as cool as it's been, you've had a handful of bands who have done sort of like live streams that you can pay for and things like that. It's nice to have instead of nothing, but it's not a replacement in any way. And you have a lot of bands who, sat out most of the year. They just didn't want to put out their albums. But then you finally have, you're starting to see more and more of them, different genres and stuff. But Bruce Springsteen finally put out an album, and AC/DC was like, people have been waiting for this for a while. Let's just put it out, So,
yeah.
And your album came out in the spring, the one I referenced earlier, Five-Man London Jam. I mean,
I think that came out kind of before all this kicked off, wasn't it? Because it was about April it kicked off, wasn't it?
That's true. I think when it was really, it sort of like kind of snuck in right there fairly late. And And before we dive into the book, I wanted to just mention how much I enjoy that album. I was always a fan of the original, 5-man acoustical jam from 1990, and I think that's great. And what I love about this one, obviously, is the band has a couple decades more songs to choose from, and some great covers mixed in as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the best thing, I'm going to assume, for you guys in the band was that you did this show at Abbey Road, right?
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, me sitting in Abbey Road #2, playing my Hofner bass on We Can Work It Out, singing, with Jeff was a pretty big. I was on air, walking on air. It was pretty cool knowing that McCartney was somewhere in that room playing his Hofner bass, singing We Can Work It Out, in 1965.
Yeah.
Was pretty cool for me.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. It's one of those things that even people not in the music industry, obviously, Abbey Road sort of has this legend to it, more so than really anywhere else. And sort of transitioning to your being a fan of the Beatles, I thought there's a really nice forward to your book from Joe Elliott. And in it, he talks about how he first really got to know you. I guess you guys had a hotel room next to each other, and he heard you
Yeah.
playing Paul McCartney and Wings, and then he just sort of invited himself over, right? And you guys started talking about Beatles.
Yeah, he knocked on the door. Me and Frank used to share a room back then. And it was Joe, and he said, "Hey, what's up?" And I guess he was in the room next to us, and he heard us, and they're, playing Wings and carrying on. And he came in and stayed till about 4 or 5 in the morning. And we had a couple of guitars, and we were singing all these, obscure Wings songs, and we bonded over Paul McCartney. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And in the forward, Joe, is a very funny guy in that he's just like, yeah, you. I guess he says that you kind of remember he and Def Leppard kind of ignoring you guys the first time you were on tour, and he's just sort of like, I don't remember it that way, but it's Brian's book, so I'll let it stand.
No,
I
it
thought
was
that.
him. It wasn't the band. It was
Oh, it
him.
was just Joe.
Yeah,
To
yeah.
everybody else.
He's like my brother.
Sure.
Joe is. And,
Yeah.
We're really at home with Brian here. So we're going to just
This is
let
good.
my
This is
phone
perfect.
do its thing. So, it was him because he was very, that was, the first thing they had done. It was in England, and he wasn't rude or standoffish or anything. He just wasn't around. And, I would hang out with Clark and Phil Collin, and, I'd see Sav and Rick Allen, but Joe was never around. So I thought, then that maybe just Joe didn't like us. And it, and then, like I said, we get to Glens Falls or wherever we were. I think it was Glens Falls.
Yeah, that's what it says in the forward.
Yeah, and he,
Falls, New York,
he
yeah.
knocked on the door and came over, and since that day, he's been like my best friend in a rock band.
Yeah, and you guys have obviously toured with Def Leppard a number of times over the years. I saw you guys with them and Poison. It was a few years ago now. I forget how many years ago, but always, always good. It's always a good combination to see you guys together. So it's nice that the friendship has continued, and I know that Phil from Def Leppard obviously produced the last actual studio album that the band did.
Yeah, I mean, that band is brethren to us. I mean, they're like, there's a kinship there. We had the same managers back in, the heyday. We have the same manager today. We've always stayed in touch, and, I was on the email with Joe last night. He's in Dublin. I'm in New York, and I talked to Phil last week. So, they're not a bad set of, mentors or big brothers to have. They've always been that way since we met them. They always have encouraged us to do, the best work we could. And, I think there's a soft spot for us with them as well. You know what I mean? They kind of, they look at us like, we're similar backgrounds. 5-piece band. We all grew up kind of, lower middle class, whatever, from a working town. a lot of similarities between Def Leppard and Tesla, and musically as well. I mean, look, me and Frank, when we first started playing, we used to do Def Leppard songs. You know,
Sure, yeah.
we learned how to write songs from doing Def Leppard songs. They were a big part of our inspiration.
Yeah, no, I mean that obviously you can certainly see, because of the time that you guys would have gotten together before you started writing and recording your own material would be sort of the early pre-Pyromania Def Leppard.
Yeah, well, High and Dry,
Yeah,
On Through the Night, even Pyromania. You know, Pyromania. We were doing Rock and Rock of Ages, and
sure.
you know, we've played it with Phil and Clark. We played Rock of Ages one night. They got on stage with us in Amsterdam, and that was before that was the first time we met Steve and Phil, and they came to the gig with our manager at the time, Peter Minch, and they got up and we had this super jam at the end, which is, you know, it was cool. It was kind of legendary.
Oh
So,
yeah.
you know, there's a couple pictures of Def Leppard and Tesla in my book. Obviously me and Joe. So it's cool.
Yeah, no, and a few weeks ago, I was talking with musician Brian Ray. He's in McCartney's
Paul
band.
McCartney.
Yeah, and we got to talking about Def Leppard, and just sort of, because we were talking about sort of this idea of singles, putting out singles for records, because he had a new song out at the time. He still has it out, and the idea that that Pyromania album comes out, and just has this attack of like 4 huge songs all at once, most
Mm-hmm.
of which there'd be rioting if they didn't play all of them when they go out on tour right now. And so that was probably a great time to kind of get in with them. It's sort of, they were obviously popular here in the US, but as Joe writes in the forward, they weren't popular in the UK. It took like a decade into their career for them to actually be popular. But, I think that it seems like you guys really fit together well back then and now for where everybody's at. I wanted to kind of shift to, in the notes for the book, because I read through a lot of it, but I haven't finished it yet. It talks about some of your encounters or collaborations with people. And because we were talking about Paul McCartney a couple times, I'm wondering, did you ever just meet him? Have you ever collaborated with him on anything? What was your interaction with
I've
Sir
met him
Paul?
a couple of times.
Okay.
And I've never collaborated with him. And he's super, super nice and super, super friendly. But I doubt he even knew who I was, you know what I mean, when I met him. The last time I met him was on one of the tours, I think 2004, 2005, whatever. And one of my friends was this wardrobe person. So I went to the show to see Allie and me and my wife, and Paul came in wardrobe and said, "Oh, Allie, who are your friends?" And she said, "This is my friend Brian and Monique." And I said, "Hey man, how you doing?" I told him I played in a rock band called Tesla, and he said, "Oh, cool. Are you the lead singer?" And I said, No, I'm the bass player. Sometimes I play a Hofner like you. And he went, "Oh, cool." And he was really, really friendly. But, he was my hero. He's still my hero. I mean, when I was a kid, it was, him, Jimmy Page, and Freddie Mercury. Those 3 were my heroes. And yeah, I have a real good friendship with Jimmy Page. He's one of my good friends, the other good friend from a rock band. But Paul, I met him, but I wouldn't say that we were friends in any way, shape, or fashion. But I did get to meet my hero a couple of times, and I wasn't let down. Where it's a drag sometimes you meet your heroes and they're real assholes.
Yeah.
And he was such a cool, just nice man.
Yeah. And, I saw him a few years ago, and I think at that point he was 73, and he did like an almost 3-hour show.
Oh, it's amazing.
And there's, bands who aren't even maybe in their mid 40s that, doing 90 minutes seems like too much to ask. I'm talking about headliners, and you're just
I
like,
know, we're one of them. We only do 90 minutes.
Well, I didn't mean it that way, but
no, but it's true. I mean, look, McCartney's almost 80 now.
Yeah.
And he plays 2.5, almost 3 hours, and he doesn't even take a drink of water. So, it's pretty amazing. I tell people I've seen him play about 20 times.
Sure.
And I just tell people, when you go see Paul McCartney, it's like a religious experience. I mean, the whole crowd knows every word to every song. They know every note to every lick in every song. He's the best, period. Hands down, end of story.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I was saying this to Brian Ray when I talked to him. Was the idea that you'll see him? It'll be a 3-hour show, and you'll be like, "Oh my god, that was so great! He played all the songs I want." And then you're driving home, and you think of like 10 more great songs he could have also played that would have been on the same level as the ones he did. But yeah, at
Oh yeah,
some point,
he could easily play 6-hour show if he wanted.
it's true. I definitely agree. A couple other people that are referenced in the book. One of my all-time favorites, we just talked about how you were supposed to be on tour with him this year, will always be Alice Cooper. And you have toured with him in the past, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about how well you've known Alice. And, everybody that I talked to, I guess David Ellefson from Megadeth is practically neighbors with him. So he always has the nicest thing. I've interviewed him a few times. He always talks about Alice is essentially like the mayor of Phoenix. If you're doing an event, you don't call the mayor of Phoenix to be there to open, to commemorate the event. You call Alice Cooper if he's in town because he's sort of this beloved figure there.
Yeah, it's true. We the second tour we ever did, the first tour we did was with David Lee Roth. And then the second tour we did, we went out for, I think, 6 weeks opening up for Alice Cooper. And, he was great to us. He was just a gentleman, super cool, treated the band very well when we were on tour. And every time we were in the Phoenix area, he'd come down and see us play, now and again. We've done his Christmas pudding
Sure.
shows, Jeff and Frank have done them. Alex is just a stand-up, straight-up dude. He's a great guy.
Yeah, and you referenced also opening for David Lee Roth, who is as a front man, he's just this freak of nature to just stand in the audience and watch. I mean, right before basically when concerts stopped happening, I had just seen him open for Kiss at the Staples Center in LA at the beginning of March. Like a week later, they were like, "Oh, the last thing you should ever do is be around 20,000 people." So I had like a week where I was like, "Oh, did I possibly do something?" And I don't even know how old he is, but it's just like and I've seen him many times over the years. It's just, he's such an entertaining character. And then, you'll hear him interviewed, like Joe Rogan talked to him for 3 hours. He used to do a radio show, and he's just this, there's not a lot of people that I have doubts whether or not they're from Earth or possibly from some other planet, but David Lee Roth might just be that. If there is an alien living among us, I think it might be Dave.
Okay. All right.
He's just one of the singularly most unique people that, and I don't know, I've never spoken to him. Can't imagine I ever would have occasion to.
I mean, we toured with him, but I only had one conversation with him the whole time.
Only one. Okay.
The only one, the very last night of the tour. He called us all in and told us he wanted to manage us.
Oh, okay.
And that was the last night of the tour. And we said, well, we're managed by Q Prime, Peter and Cliff. We're pretty happy, but, thank you. Thanks, Dave. And honestly, that, I'd like to tell you that, we hung out and catering and, he kept pretty isolated and, I only spoke to him one time.
That's well, you know what? It could have been one of those things where you toured with him and never spoke to him. So, there's that.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's at least
I'd like to speak to him again. I haven't,
Sure.
Thank him. He took us out on our tour. If we wouldn't have went out on that David Lee Roth tour, I don't know. That was the first time anyone ever saw us, and he gave us our first chance. So for that, I'm always in gratitude for, indebted to him forever for that, because, sure, the Def Leppard tour, blew us up, but David took us out, for 6 weeks before anyone ever heard of us. Yeah. So I'll always be indebted to him for that.
Yeah, and I'm sure, touring like you're saying with David Lee Roth and Alice Cooper kind of puts you in a position where there's at least the awareness of getting onto the Def Leppard tour. So,
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk more about the band in a little bit, but I want to not let the title of your book hang in the air. Now, you told me about this a couple of years ago when I interviewed with you, but
Mm-hmm.
I love the title of the book, and the fact that the title is "Son of a Milkman." It's not just a play on words or some clever innuendo. It's the fact that you are literally son of a milkman, correct?
I am I am the illegitimate son of the milkman.
And that's just, it's one of those things that's kind of just out there in the public
Well,
lexicon.
it's always a joke, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's always, oh, you were
yeah,
the
exactly.
milkman kid.
Yeah.
Well, I was. I am. I wear it like a badge of honor. Some people say, oh man, aren't you like ashamed to say that? And I'm like, fuck no, I'm not ashamed of anything, man. I mean, we're all fucking human. We all got whatever
Yeah.
skeletons, whatever dirty little secrets, whatever, it's just human nature. And, you know, maybe some of my fans are illegitimate sons of the postman or something, so they can relate.
Yeah.
So I
Some,
thought
some,
it was a funny title.
no, it's definitely a great attention grabber. And then when you mentioned to me that it's actually true, it's just like, oh yeah, what else could you possibly call the book? Uh,
Yeah.
and we'll talk in a few minutes about how it's a very personal book, but obviously it could also appeal to people that want to just sort of get the history of the band, of Tesla, and your career. And you talk about, you're very clear that, look, all the guys might remember it differently. This is the way I remember it. And I just wanted to ask, what were some of, obviously there's so many moments that stand out in general. What were some of these big moments? We're talking about going out on these early tours with David Lee Roth, Alice Cooper, but sort of individual moments where, oh, hey, is that our song on the radio, or seeing your video for the first time? How much did that mean in those moments? And are those some of the moments that really define the early years of the band being together for you?
Well, I think at the time it meant everything. I mean, the first time you heard your song on the radio, I think I pulled over, turned up the radio, because when you were a kid, you wanted to get a record deal, you wanted to have your song on the radio. Then when you actually achieved that, you were like, wow, okay, cool. This is, and then, you see your video for the first time on MTV, and, you see your record for the first time in the store, you know what I mean? And then you play your first, big arena gig with David Lee Roth.
Sure,
and,
yeah.
there's so many of them, but then it just kind of got into this natural progression of the way things went. But, the big thing was first hearing your song on the radio, then, seeing it on MTV, then, seeing your song, your record in this thing, then, playing a big arena, then getting a gold record, and then getting a platinum record, and then doing it twice, and then doing it 3 times, 4. Tesla had 5 straight platinum records. So with our first 5 albums. So that's an achievement I'm pretty proud of. But I think the achievement I'm most proud of is that we're still doing it now. And that, we broke up for 5 years and we managed to put it all back together and, be resilient. And, that's kind of what I talk about in the book, is that, even though the shit, comes at you in all different forms from all different directions, you got to let it just bounce off and keep going and stay true to what, your heart wants to do. And the one thing that, even with this COVID thing, I think the guys in Tesla, again, are reminded how much that the whole thing is pretty special to us, because we've been together 20 years since we broke up. And then there was 10 years, and then we were off 5 years, because it's 30 something years. But, when we got back together in 2000, we were humbled and realized that it was special. And, having like this last year of events, I think has done it again to us in the sense that, hey, we do miss each other, and hey, we do miss playing, and sure, when you do it, month in, month out for 20 years, it gets to be a grind sometimes, and you get on each other's nerves. But sitting here today, I'd give anything to get back and play with those four crazy fuckers.
Yeah, and that was one of the things I was thinking when I was sort of reading the there is a chapter that very much deals with the basically both parts of the party's over, pills, thrills, and backstage fist fights. There's some great chapter titles, and that's one of them. Do you feel that the success of the previous 20 years in terms of actually staying together is because you were all able to realize how important it was, whereas maybe the previous 10 to 15 years, it just sort of had to end in that moment because guys didn't appreciate it? Or
I think the first half of our career, or the first 10 years, we took it for granted, right?
Sure.
And then once we got back together in 2000, we respect it a lot more, and we don't take it for granted.
The book
which goes to why one of us isn't
sorry, you were saying?
Which goes to why, one guy isn't in the band.
Sure.
Right. Which I don't really want to give him any airtime, but
that's fine.
He let's just say certain members respected what we had, and a certain member didn't.
Yeah, and I think that you'll see bands, you don't even have to go into which ones, that bands that are able to continue because of who they end up having in the band. I mean, it's a fairly controversial thing for some people, but both Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley say that by having Eric Singer and Tommy Thayer in the band and not Ace and Peter, they've done 20 more years than they thought they were going to. And if that's what works for, and that's only 4 guys in a band, but and that's probably a little different because of that's a very narrow pyramid at the top with Gene and Paul. But you hear so many bands, that's just the one that came to mind, is just changing who you're going out there with. You're talking about playing every night for 20 years. It can be that simple. What I was going to ask you, though, is the book is very honest about the struggles within the band and of course, within yourself, but within the band. And you talk about how Jeff Keith, the singer, is a very honest guy. So you feel like there's no reason you can't mention how much of a challenge it was when you guys were doing what for me has always been my favorite Tesla album, is Psychotic Supper. That I have the notes right here. He just wasn't into writing because he was remodeling his house. He sent his wife to represent himself at a band meeting, but he was also doing a lot of methamphetamine. And I feel like that combination must have made it very challenging to be in Tesla and try and, make a record. You talked about how you had, you'd had a series of platinum records, and I believe that one ultimately did go platinum as well. But I can imagine that was probably a particularly trying time to try and keep the momentum going when, your singer is just not all in it.
Yeah, it was a strange time, and he's fine and has been fine several times since then.
Sure.
It was just, it was that writing period, and, it was crazy because, he was a little bit, out there on the limb, and the one day when his wife showed up for the meeting, that was kind of a Yoko Ono moment.
Yeah.
But look, man, that was 30 years.
No. It's a long time ago. And I'm glad that obviously whatever that was not what ended the band forever. But
no, we went on, we kept on. I mean, he got, we made, Bust a Nut after that.
Sure.
Then we busted up. Should have been called Busting Up.
Well, yeah. Well,
it's funny with Jeff, because I asked him, I said, is there anything you don't want me to talk about in the book? He said, no, say whatever you want. It's all true.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of, not even just musicians, a lot of public figures would be like, yeah, the 3 or 4 things you can't put in the book, that probably a lot of people would have said that. And
Hey, look,
it's kind of
I didn't say anything about anybody in the book that I wouldn't say about myself. I did drugs. I was fucked
sure.
up like everyone else. You know, I guess obviously the big thing is, the Skio issue, which we all know that story. So,
Yeah,
but I'm talking about me and Frank doing drugs together, and Troy had we all had drug issues. We just never talked about it. You know
yeah,
what I mean? I told somebody, I said, look, Tesla were never on a cover of any rock magazines. The only one magazine we were ever on the cover of was Rip magazine. And this guy, Lon Friend, put us on the
sure.
cover,
Yeah, I
right?
remember Lon Friend. Yeah,
Because we weren't that kind of a marketable band. We didn't have any outrageous guys in the band. We didn't have an Angus or a Slash, or an Axel or Tyler or Perry. We were just like this working class, blue collar rock and roll band, like Bad Company, if you will, but we had, the outrageousness that those, we did drugs, and, we had sex with women, and all those
sure.
things. We just didn't make it, a lot of that shit that was in those magazines was, stupid shit like that.
Yeah,
And, I think maybe Peter and Cliff really didn't want us to be portrayed like that as well. Um, it always has and always will be about the music when it comes to Tesla.
yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that I've heard you and other guys in the band always characterize it as more of like a jeans and t-shirt band. And some of the bands of that era, obviously, maybe even some that the songs were nowhere near as good, but were on the covers of those magazines, were because they played into whatever that lifestyle was. And it was just
Right,
this crazy public persona.
and the record companies wanted you to do that
Yeah,
at the time, and I remember, Geffen wanting us to do it, and Peter and Cliff really resisting it, and they got it in our minds early on that we didn't want to do that either. So we were like, no, it's okay,
yeah.
and then we bitch about not being on the cover of magazines and stuff as well. It's kind of like a double-edged sword, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well,
Mm.
you referenced the Bust a Nut record, and that came out at a time where and I've talked to a lot of musicians whose careers were moving along very well at that time,
Mm.
and if you had a specific kind of hard rock record come out in '93, I think that came out in '94. That was
Mm-hmm.
the same. If the same songs come out a couple years earlier, there could be a lot of it wasn't even about the quality of the record. It was probably about how the company felt. And they were just like, yeah, we're not pushing that right now. We want
Yeah,
to,
that's
we want to
exactly
find
what
the next
happened.
Alice in Chains or Soundgarden or whatever.
If that
So,
record would have came out when Psychotic Supper came out, which was 91, it would have been a multi-platinum album.
right.
But at that point, Geffen had Nirvana, and that whole scene was happening. And, it's funny because I tell people, we went from, 1.5 million records on Psychotic Supper to, I think we sold like 700,000 at that time when it came
Yeah,
out of
sure.
our Bust a Nut, and they were threatening to drop us. Now, who
Yeah.
dropped somebody that just sold 700,000 copies?
Yeah.
But that was the mentality of what was going on at that point in time in the industry, because, all of a sudden, we went from being the champions of AOR radio to no one wanting to play us. And we couldn't understand it. I think that's what kind of led to the demise of the band as well, because we just kind of felt like everyone all of a sudden turned their backs on us and didn't like us for no apparent reason outside of that this new thing called grunge had come out. And I remember our manager, Cliff, just telling me one day, yeah, it's over, man.
Wow.
No one cares about you anymore. And I was like, wow, how could you? I was thinking to myself, how could you say that to me? I mean, last year we were, in arenas.
Yeah. Well, look, I showed this off when I talked to Frank earlier. I have on this Psychotic upper tour shirt of the Pusshead Nikolai
That's a
Tesla.
great shirt.
I just shocked I can still wear it almost 30 years later.
I can't wear mine.
Well, it's sort of a badge of honor. I usually only break it out if I'm going to go see the band, but I figured if I was going to talk to you, and that was, was you guys headlining. Like I saw you guys at the Meadowlands Arena in New Jersey, and it really was like the next album comes out, and I don't even remember what level of touring there was in the Northeast or whatever. And the next thing I knew, the band broke up, and then I was very glad to hear that you guys were back. But do you feel like the only reason that, say, you're together now in 2020 is because you took that time apart? Like, was that important? Yes, there's all those circumstances in that moment, but if you guys had tried to push through,
I don't know that had that not happened, we'd still be here today.
Right.
I think, it happened. It was a painful time in our lives. But like I said, it made some of us really appreciate what we had, which is a gift, this Tesla thing. And so you treat it, you cherish it and treat it with a lot more care the second time around. And, like I said to you now, with this COVID thing, it's kind of done that again, because I think, hopefully when we do finally resume and get back to doing what we do, we'll have a lot more appreciation again.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I referenced how much I like the titles of the chapters, the return of Tesla. Why the fuck not? I think is, it really stands out as one of the, great, it's a great title there. You reference that the book is filled with, the sex, drugs, rock and roll people expect from a musician's book. But I think that you also kind of talk about it in a real way about how those issues are, you're calling attention to the fact that exactly those things are what contributes to the way lives can spin out of control for a lot of musicians. I mean, some of them very tragically, but you sort of talk about some of your own struggles. And do you feel that that was just exacerbated by being in a band that has the platinum records, that has all of that? Or is this just something that you feel really, no matter what you did, this was just part of who you were and it was going to be hard for you to deal with?
No, I think a lot of it was exasperated by being in the band. I mean, the bulimia aspect was, I grew up, I was kind of a pudgy kid, and then I lost a bunch of weight. And then, to keep the weight off, to maintain this image of being in a rock band and a rock star, I used to throw up a lot in the late 80s, early 90s. The stress issues, the stress came from being in a fucking crazy band. That band, I always felt that the rug could be pulled out from under us at any time, either by ourselves or, by the industry, like I talk about in 95 with the grunge thing. So that was very unsettling. So there was a constant sense of stress, I couldn't relax. So I think a lot of my struggles, the autoimmune thing, the colitis, I was probably born with that. Yeah. But stress is a major trigger to that. So it kind of becomes like this vicious cycle. The stress feeds the autoimmune and you know what I mean? So, I mean, the worst time I ever had with my colitis is, when I was on tour with Tesla, and that was, I think, 2008. I missed a couple of shows and, they wanted to hospitalize me and I wouldn't let them. And, I wound up, bouncing back and doing it. And, to where today, my weight fluctuates and all that stuff. And it's not because I'm pounding Haagen-Dazs and eating chocolate cakes.
Right.
It's because of the drugs I take for my autoimmune disease puts weight on you. So
Yeah.
it's this constant up and down thing. And that hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is now I know how to deal with it better. You know, I'm still going up and down, and I
Yeah.
still have this balancing act. I just don't let it get to me as much as I did a few years back. Because a few years back, I seriously contemplated, you know, resigning, and, you know, because I just felt like shit all the time. And, you know, today I feel better. I feel better in the place I'm at. And, but I still have the same struggles. I mean, I still suffer, you know, from anxiety. You know, I haven't been bulimic for years.
Yeah.
You know, I got that, I overcame that, but I still, anxiety, depression, and the autoimmune disease thing, and, you know, the weight fluctuation, those things are daily things with me. I just, you know, it's just how I attack them. And, you know, what I'm trying to get to people in the book is like, look, just because I'm in a rock band, I'm just like you. It's just my job. It's what I do. So don't think that if you have these same problems that I don't, you know,
Yeah.
that, you know, you're not exempt because you know, you sold a bunch of records or whatever, you know. So, you know, hopefully you can relate to it. And when you come and see us or you're listening to those songs, know that someone else is going through what you're going through as well. And if I can help, and you want to, you know, you want to talk to me about some of those issues, I'm down. You know, people, I'm really kind of a shy guy. So people, when they come up to me, they don't know how to approach me.
Sure.
Because if I don't know you, I won't talk to you, because I'm not that way. I'm not one of those guys that can just go, hi, I'm Brian. How you doing?
Right.
Jeff does. And, you know, Frank does. And Troy certainly does. But I'm just not that guy. But it's not that I don't like people. I do. So, you know, it's kind of, like I said, if, you know, someone's suffering from depression, anxiety, or, you know, ulcerative colitis or something, and they want to talk to me, you know, come up. Don't be afraid to say, hey, man, you know, I got colitis too.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
and if I can help, I'll try to help you, you know, by sharing some of my stories with you. You know, if you want to know what kind of bass I play or something, I'm probably not that interested in talking.
right. Well, I thought it was, it's interesting in the book, you tell a story about getting the opportunity to meet Chris Cornell. And unfortunately, as
Mm,
we all know, looking back, he was
mm.
clearly dealing with a lot of the same things. And I think for a lot of us, you know, on the outside, you just can't imagine like Chris Cornell, like what
Well,
could
that was the only
possibly,
time I ever met
yeah,
Chris. And, you know, I was driving him and Ross around, and, you know, Ross had gone in, and me and Chris started talking about anxiety attacks.
yeah,
And I said, dude, I have anxiety attacks, you know. He's like, yeah. And, you know, and that's what I remember from meeting him. You know, it wasn't, you know, like, you know, Spoon Man was my favorite Soundgarden song or something. It was like, wow, this dude suffers from the same shit I suffer from. Obviously, I didn't realize how bad it
yeah,
was, you know. Uh, and, you know, it's a drag because he killed himself, you know.
yeah.
So, but
And I think for,
you know, that's what I remember from meeting him was,
yeah,
you know, wow, we were talking about, you know, anxiety and how he dealt with it, or how, you know, how I dealt with it. You know, I think I told him I take Paxil now or something, you know what I mean? And,
yeah.
you know, I can't remember too much about it now that, you know.
No, but I think it's important because it just reinforces to anybody from the outside, even you who suffer from those things, you wouldn't necessarily look at Chris Cornell and be like, oh yeah, this guy probably has a lot of things that he's worried about. You know, for those of us on the outside, he seems like the definition of somebody who would have had it all. You know, I mean, Chris Cornell looks
Yeah,
the
no,
way he
exactly. I
does.
would never thought in a million years that,
Yeah,
you know, when
yeah,
I met Chris Cornell, we'd be talking about
yeah.
anxiety attacks.
You have that level of
I thought we'd be talking
success.
about, you know, music or something.
Yeah, you have that level of success, you have that voice, you look like him, and you know, it's just, I mean, and I think that that's the sort of thing why it's great that you have that anecdote in the book, to kind of explain that. And the thing that I didn't realize until I read it in your book was how close together you had Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington of Linkin Park, and Anthony Bourdain. I guess they all committed suicide sort of around the same time. And it just, it's, I don't know. I mean, it's so hard to just imagine, but I think that that's all the more reason why I hope that, you calling attention to all of these things, hopefully it is relatable to people who pick up the book, which of
Yeah,
course
no, it
is
is.
some of
It's
the
like depression's a real fucking thing,
Yeah.
and anxiety, and it's a scary fucking thing, especially if you don't know what it is. And, I think I talk about it in the book how last year I was in Canada and I had a really bad bout with depression. And, I used to always think, how could someone kill themselves? I don't know, how someone could ever contemplate doing that, until I had this really bad depression last year. Now, don't get me wrong. I wasn't saying I was suicidal or anything, but it was so bad. It was such like a black hole that I'd never experienced it in that way before. And after that, I could say, well, I think I can understand why someone would do this, if it got worse than what I had, because I don't know what degree Chris, Anthony, or Chester were suffering, All I know is I had it pretty bad, and it kind of went, whoa, this is a dangerous slope.
Yeah, and I think that it was interesting that you referenced it, and you do mention in the book that it was last year when you were on that Canadian tour with Def Leppard. So as recently as last year, you're well aware that you have this, you have these issues, and it's just continually that much of a struggle. It's what you just said a few minutes ago, that it's something that you constantly have to deal with. And I think certainly you could avoid talking about it and, just tell a bunch of
To be
stories
quite
about.
honest with you, I'm dealing with it right now.
Okay.
It's a depressing fucking time.
Yeah.
This COVID thing, I've got this, what do I do? I don't have a job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's depressing right now. And I'm battling it, now, but I know, I'll be all right. And, I got good people around me. And if it gets really bad, then, I'll call my doctor, my psychiatrist, or,
Sure.
Whatever. But it's not like it goes away. You don't get to pick it,
Right.
So, depression and anxiety are a motherfucker, man. And anyone out there that, is suffering from it, reach out to somebody,
Yeah. You mentioned, psychiatrist, and I thought the interesting thing, I think this is in, the kind of prologue to the book, is that writing the book came out of talking to your therapist about sort of working through all this stuff, and you felt like the easiest way to do it was to write it out. But what I thought was the interesting thing is that was over the course of about 20 years. So what made you think that, well, now this would be the time to share the story, if you'd been kind of putting it all together for so long?
How it came about was Ike said to me, he said, a lot of people, because this was when I had really bad anxiety in 91, which was a stressful point. It's like stress. It all feeds it, right? So we were making Psychotic Supper, and I had just gotten married, and there's all this stress in my life and all this uncertainty, and, the anxiety kicked up into a frenzy, and that's how I wound up seeing Ike. And through my therapy with him, he said a lot of people, they let shit go by writing a book, or writing it down, or whatever the case may be, right? And he said, you ought to write a book one day. And I went, yeah, okay, yeah, cool.
Right.
I'm lying to the guy about how much I'm drinking and shit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's all the tricks you play when you're young. You realize that you're just fucking yourself, you got to get honest with yourself. And I still wasn't being honest with myself. And then I just think one day it just came to a point where, you know, enough time had gone by, and it started out, you know, as I'll write a book about my life in Tesla, right? Because that
Yeah.
many years had gone by, and then it kind of evolved into, well, you should talk about not just Tesla, because everyone does, you know, that, but also talk about the struggles you have. And then it reverted me back to Ike when he said, well, hey, look, you should write a book about, you know, letting all this shit go, and, you know, keeping all this shit suppressed, you know, just by the title of the book. Right here it is, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I only
Son of
have
the
a digital.
Milkman.
Yeah. I only have a digital version, so I can't hold it up. So thank you for,
Yeah, there it is. That's the cover.
yeah.
There's me looking much better than I look right now. But like I said, I right now I'm in my COVID depression mode. Um, shit. Sorry, I lost my
No,
train
it's
of
all
thought.
right. So the idea of actually telling, you know, look, you
Right,
could have,
like I used to keep the fact that I was the milkman's son, or, you know, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have told you that my
yeah,
real name wasn't Brian Wheaton. I was an illegitimate son. You know what I mean? I wouldn't have
yeah,
shared some of that stuff because I kept it. The point being, I kept it suppressed. And I think that when you write it out and you let it go, it kind of liberates you.
yeah. No, that makes sense. And look, I think that it's, look, look, I've read books about, you know, about groupies and drugs and the tour bus and all that. That can be fun, but you can really, yeah, I know I was going to say, but you can really identify and relate to a person when they're real with you, you know. And, you know, what I've seen, the book has, you know, references to all that stuff, but it really focuses on, you know, what it all meant to you as a person. And like we were just saying a few minutes ago, the impact all of it has on you, Brian Wheat, not just like, oh yeah, that guy in Tesla probably, you know, got a lot of ass when he was out on that tour with Def Leppard, you know? So I
Sure,
think
it
that,
did, but
yeah, of course.
that's not, you know, that there's more to the layers to the onion.
Yeah,
Oh, shit,
exactly.
my
No,
you
that's
there,
all right. Yeah.
buddy?
Yeah. No, yeah. You're still there. Yeah. You clicked away, but,
Yeah, my
uh,
phone said I got
yeah,
like 20% battery. I'll have to
that's all right.
switch.
Well, just a couple more, no, a couple more things I'll ask you. And
Mhm.
I thought this was great that, in the notes it referenced that, well, I guess the notes were from an interview, and somebody asked about the best advice you'd ever gotten. And you said you got two great pieces of advice from your mom. And,
Mm.
I don't know if you remember what they both were, but, I thought that, they're both very practical. One is very simple. Anything that goes up has to come down. But the more practical one is always save half of what you make. And I think that a lot of public figures, whether they be musicians, especially you hear about athletes, they don't save any of what they make. And,
No.
I, you
Yeah,
know,
that was her thing. What goes up always comes down, and save half of what you. I dedicated the book to her.
yeah,
So, you know, she was an amazing woman. You know, she we were super tight, and you know, she raised me. And like I say in the book, she took a lot of shit at that time in American society, or I don't know what it was like in the rest of the world, but you know, it wasn't, you know, too cool to have, you know, illegitimate kid. So she caught a lot of shit for it,
yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
including from her own family. But I love my mom. She was, you know, to the day, you know, I still do this day. Uh, you know, hopefully I'll see her again. You know,
But not too soon, you know.
well, no. She's up there riling up people, anyways.
Yeah.
But
Do you think she would say you should shave the beard, or you think that she would think it
oh,
was
she'd
cool?
say, "What the fuck are you got on your face? Shave that thing off. You look like Rasputin." That's what she'd say. You look like Rasputin.
I love that.
Yeah, that's what she'd say. And I'd say, yeah, Mom, well,
Yeah.
fuck you.
Rasputin was allowed to go outside and eat in a restaurant. So, you know, he
Yeah.
could do what he
Yeah,
wanted.
she'd definitely be fucking all over me about the beard. You know, part of it is that I've never had a beard this long in my life.
Right.
and so I want to see how long it'll go. And part of me is like, well, I said I'd shave it when this Corona thing's over and we can go back and play it. I'm going to stick to my word.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think that
And
there was
then,
this.
look, for 3 years from now, there'll be some interesting pictures of me like this interview, and people go, look how fucked up he looked.
Right, exactly.
Right. And then I do the new reveal and the all new healthy and in shape and clean and black hair again, or brown
Right.
hair, and instead of all gray. Well, I'm
Yeah,
getting pretty
but
gray.
that's all
Um,
right. Like
yeah.
I said,
So,
it's the right
well,
time of year for that.
I just turned 58, so I have a few grays in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm 44 and I have plenty. They're just hidden well by the lighting that I'm using. Then the last thing I wanted to ask you about is obviously the book has a co-writer. His name's Chris Epting, and he had worked with Phil Collin and John Oates before. Talk about collaborating with somebody who has the experience of, not just having written before, but having worked with other musicians.
Well, it was great because, I started writing this book about 5 years ago or 6 years ago. And I started with my friend in England, this guy, Pete Mikowski. And, he basically was interviewing me. And then he went back to England, so we didn't really get to finish it off. And he kind of wrote it in more of a English person's point of view. Had a lot of Englishisms in it, And then from that, I switched over to this guy, Kenny Nicholson, who I've known since I was a kid. And, he's a pretty smart guy. So he kind of did all the chronological thing, and when we finished that manuscript, it was similar to what the book is now, except it read like an interview instead of a book.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
And at that point, then I think Mike Kobayashi said to me, my manager, why don't you try doing, working with Chris, see how that goes. And, to make it more of, and that's when we started to touch more upon, other things like the health issues and, write it like an author that writes books. I mean, I didn't write the book. I just told all the stories.
Right,
What I
sure.
mean? And he wrote and put it together. He's great. I love Chris. He's great. And we're talking about doing another book, after this one, just because we had so much fun doing it.
Yeah.
And he's a great guy. Chris Epting's a great guy, as were Kenny and as Pete. But, so, and I acknowledge them all in the book, but, Chris, that's what Chris does. He writes books.
Yeah, and from what I've read of it, I think it works really well as a book instead of I've read books that are that interview style. Those can be interesting too, but I think you can really feel more in the moment than question and answer. So
Yeah,
I think, yeah. Well, Brian, best of luck with the book, Son of a Milkman. I appreciate you being so generous with your time, as you always are. I counted in my head. I think this is the fourth time I've talked to you. I always appreciate it.
I
Usually,
always enjoy talking to you because you always ask cool questions. You know what I mean? And it's always my pleasure, man.
yeah. And I hope that before too long, I'll be able to hold up a different album that would be the new Tesla album. But really, in all honesty, I should probably replace this T-shirt that I've had since 1992.
No, keep it, man.
Oh, I'm keeping it. I just could use another one too, though.
Well, so. I'll tell you what. When we play another show in your area, you come and I'll give you one.
All right. I'm gonna clip this out and put it in my phone, and I'll go over to the merch counter and I'll be like, hey, I don't need to pay for this. Brian said he's going to give me one, but I can't wait to.
Will too.
Yeah, well, I hope that. Look,
then I'll get a call backstage. Hey, there's some guy out here says you said he could have a shirt. I said, oh yeah, he's all right. Give him one.
I appreciate it. And look, I hope that I'm able to see the band soon. And very selfishly, I really want it to be that show at the Hollywood Bowl with Alice Cooper and Lita Ford.
Oh, so did I, man. And hopefully we'll be able to do it reschedule the tour,
Yeah.
redo it, or we were all looking forward
Yeah.
to it. So
I,
it's
I,
a real
I know
drag.
I know Alice is in his 70s now, so he's probably only going to be touring for about 10 more years. So somewhere in there, hopefully he'll find the time. But
Yeah, man.
Ryan Wheat, I really appreciate it. Son of a Milkman. And I held it up. But for our audio listeners, the most recent Tesla album, 5-Man London Jam. And of course, yep, Son of a Milkman right there for those watching. I appreciate everybody for checking us out. And you can always find out more if you go to bladtcast.com, Bladtcast, like the Bladtcast on Facebook, and of course on Twitter, Bladtcast. And that is all of our time, but we will see you next time on the Bladtcast.
See you, Bill.